Hey, this is Joe with Recording Revolution. Today we're going to talk about good old-fashioned full-fat butter compression. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, stick around. Also, if you like this video and you want to learn my whole process for mixing, into which you can apply this butter compression, go get my 5-step mix guide if you haven't gotten it already. It's at recordingrevolution.com/5-step mix, and it's completely free. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so butter compression. First, let me explain what it is, and then I'll let you hear what it sounds like. I first heard about this from Kevin Ward at Mix Coach. He and I were having coffee, and he told me about it. And he didn't call it butter compression. I just eventually started calling it that because I loved it so much, and who doesn't love butter? So the idea is this. The normal compression, typical way you think about compressors, you've got your signal, you set your threshold, usually a little bit below where the signal is, right? And then as the signal crosses that threshold, the compressor turns things down, right? That's typical kind of classic use of a compressor. There's the threshold and the signal level are in the ballpark of each other, right? If I bring the threshold down lower and the signal's up here, I get more compression happening, right? And then the other parts of the compressor, like the attack time, the release time, they play into it. The ratio plays into kind of how aggressive it gets compressed once it crosses the threshold. They all kind of play off of each other. And I've got lots of videos on each of those things. So if you want to dive into compression more, they're there both here and on Home Studio Corner. But butter compression kind of throws all of those ideas out the window and adds a different element. And it's a lot like if you've ever used plugins or certain, I think of like the LA2A that are kind of almost like one knob compressors where you just kind of turn up the input and turn the output up or down, and there's not really any other controls. You just kind of saying how much compression, that's good, and then maybe adjust the volume to taste, and that's it. So this is kind of what that is. So the settings, you can do this on most compressors. The settings are, I think the original compressor was like an SSL, maybe the SSL channel strip. But the idea is simple. First, you set your ratio all the way down to 1:1, which means no compression is happening. You turn your threshold all the way down. So if your threshold goes like this, if you're normally setting it at like, -10, -12, you're going minus infinity. Go as far down as you'll go with the threshold, which means any signal that is present will now be crossing the threshold. Set your attack and release times to, I typically go somewhere in like the 30 to 50 millisecond range. And then once you're listening to the signal with a ratio of 1:1, nothing's happening. But then you slowly turn up the ratio to dial in how much compression you want. So you'll end up, generally speaking, at like 1.2:1, 1.5:1. I don't think I ever get all the way up to 2:1 because that's a whole bunch of compression. But it's really interesting because instead of the compressor only acting on the loud parts and then not really acting so much on the quiet parts, this compressor's kind of acting on everything. So the quiet stuff is getting a little compressed and just more compression as it gets louder. And the net result to my ear is a pretty smooth sound. So I've got a couple of examples set up here in Studio One. Let me show them to you. Typically, I hate the sound of compression on acoustic guitars. It just is too obvious to my ears. But this is the one exception. Butter compression can actually sound pretty good. I don't do it all the time, but when I do use compression on guitars, this is the first thing I try. And it tends to work pretty well. So here is a finger-style guitar with no compression on it. So it sounds pretty good, but there's certain notes that are jumping out. It'd be nice if it got a little tamed, and maybe just a general little butter compression would be nice. So we're going to grab Studio One's stock compressor, so you can follow along on whatever compressor you want, and we're going to dial it in. So the first thing we do is we bring the ratio all the way down, 1:1, which means there's no compression happening. Bring the threshold all the way down. The knee, don't care. Attack and release, I was thinking like between 30 and 50, so let's go with 40 for both. Let's go with 30 for both. Why not? And I'm going to use the makeup gain to kind of manually adjust. As we compress, it'll get quieter, and I'll turn it back up with the makeup gain. So let's just hit play, and I'm going to slowly increase this ratio until we're getting a few dB of gain reduction, and then we'll see what it sounds like. See right here, I'm 1.2:1, which is practically nothing, but because the threshold is all the way down, we're getting a couple dB already. I'm going to go a little bit higher. So at 1.3 to 1, we're getting about a 3 dB gain reduction on average. So I'm going to increase the volume here by about 3. And I'll listen with my ears too to make sure it's giving me the roughly the same volume before and after. So I'm going to do that by clicking this bypass button. So it's bypassed, and when the compression's in, it should be roughly the same volume. It's pretty cool. I'm going to try a little bit more compression. Why not? Now let's bypass and see if we're helping or hurting. So that's pretty aggressive. I'd probably pull it back to something like this, but I love what it's doing to it. It's nothing over the top, which is kind of the point, but it's just a nice kind of the quieter, higher notes are a little more prominent, have a little more aggressiveness to them. The low notes are getting a little bit squished down so they don't jump out as much. It's just a nice, pleasant, smooth compression. One thing, here's a great way to think about compression. Compression, I've heard people say that, like, if you're playing an electric guitar through a clean amp, like super clean, and you want to keep the clean tone, then a compressor pedal is kind of like your overdrive for that clean tone, because as you dig in and play a little louder, it pushes back. So instead of going from quiet to loud and it being the super jump in volume that's uncomfortable or painful to the ears, it gets clamped down a little bit. Overdrive on a guitar amp is like compression on steroids. It does a number of things, but one of the things it does is it compresses the signal. So that's what I'm hearing here. I'm imagining myself playing it, and when I play harder, instead of it jumping out too much in volume, it's getting nicely smoothed back down, and I don't have to like wince every time those bigger notes come in because this smooth compression's happening. Let me show it to you one more time on a vocal track. So let me open up the mixer and find my vocal, which is, I think, this one. And I'm just going to copy that compressor over because I've already set it up. So let's do the same process here. Let me find a spot where the vocal is singing. Here it is without any compression.
You're running from your shadow, but it goes wherever you go. You're running out of time.
So it's a whispery vocal. It doesn't probably need... I like to go aggressive with compressors on vocals in general, but this one probably doesn't need tons. But let's go ahead and do the same process. Let's bring the ratio all the way down, and let's turn it up until it feels good.
You're running from your shadow, but it goes wherever you go. You're running out of time. Everybody out there has got it all together. You're running from your shadow, but it goes wherever you go. You're running from your shadow. You're running from your shadow. You're running from your shadow.
Yeah, it's a subtle. So if you're like, Joe, I don't hear nothing. Yeah, I get it. It's a much more, if you tend to fall into the camp of you overcompress everything, this might be a good thing to do for a while, because it's hard to go nuts and overcompress with this. If I go up to like 6 to 1, it'll sound like this.
You're running from your shadow, but it goes wherever you go.
On certain songs, that might work really well. Vocals just respond really well to compression, but this one's cool because even on these quieter parts at the ends of phrases, it's still, like right here, it keeps everything nice and together.
You're feeling left behind.
So that little quiet gets recognized. It gets compressed, actually, but it's not as compressed as the louder stuff, which is just like compression 101, but I just like the way this sounds. One thing I will tell you, I don't typically use this as my only compressor on vocals, but I will. On my last EP, I had a vocal that was mixed, Had a compressor, had EQ, had stuff on it, de-essers, and it just was still not quite sitting on top of the mix like I wanted it to. So I added this type of compressor at the end of the chain, a secondary compressor, and did the butter compression thing. It smoothed it out and got it to sit exactly where I wanted. So add this one to your bag of tricks. All right, that wraps it up for today. If you haven't gotten my 5-step mix guide, it's waiting for you. It's free. Go to recordingrevolution.com/5-step mix to get your copy. Thanks for watching.